All right, this is for dividing decimals with the algorithm. So we went over this in class already. The first thing that we talked about is we're going to put the very first number, 7 and 65 hundredths in this case, inside the division bracket. That's called our dividend. The dividend will always be listed first if you see it with this division sign, but it will always go on the inside of the division bracket if you rewrite it like that. The second number is our divisor. That's the one that is doing the dividing. We're separating it into 5 equal groups. And that's the number that goes on the outside of our division bracket. So now what we're going to have to do is step number 1 from our notes, which is move the decimal straight up to the quotient. So you can see that I did that just now. And the step number 2 is to do your list of multiples of the 5, which is in this case your divisor. So you can do a T-chart if you like. So you can do all your multiples 1 through 9, and then you can just fill them in. 1 times 5 is 5, 2 times 5 is 10, and then you can skip count by 5s if you want to, because 5 is an easy number. So you can say 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, and finally 45. You could check it by doing the 5 times 10 to see if it gives you 50, but because this is an easy divisor, you don't have to really do that. So in this case, we're going to start dividing, which is step number 3, solving. So 5 goes into 7 only one time. So we'll put the 1 in the quotient, and we'll subtract 5 from the 7. And that gives us a remainder of 2. The next step is to have the 6 brought down to get the next number, which is 26. So we're going to look at the list of multiples, and we can see that the only number that is close to 26 is 25 without going over. So we're going to use the 5 times 5. So the 5 goes in the quotient, and the 25 goes on the bottom. We're going to subtract the 26 and minus 25, and that gives you a remainder of 1. Then we're going to bring down the next number, which is a 5. So we're just following the same steps over and over until we run out of numbers in our dividend. So we have 15, and that 15 is going to be taken care of multiplying 5 times 3. That's exactly 15. So we'll put the 3 in the quotient, and we'll subtract 15 from 15, and you can see that our remainder is 0. So our final answer for this division is 1 and 53 hundredths. Okay, we're going to label this as our quotient because it's important for you to know the vocabulary words for each part of the division. So notice that the first number that is being divided, that's the 7 and 65 hundredths. The 5 is your divisor, that's what's doing the division, and then the answer is the quotient. So like I explained it in class, if you think about money, $7.65 is kind of like what you have or what I would have in my pocket. And if I want to give it to 5 students, that's my divisor. I'm dividing into 5 equal groups. And in this case, you can see that my quotient gives me how much money each student would end up with. So each group or each student would end up with $1.53. So you can always kind of relate it to money so you can kind of make sense out of what it is that you're trying to divide. So tie it back to something that you already are familiar with. The next question is 108 and 9/10 divided by 15. So step 1, bring up the decimal point. Step 2, do your list of multiples of 15. We've covered this strategy many times in class where we have to list up all of our multiples. And one way that I show you is to do 15 times 1, which is 15, then 15 times 2 is 30. From this point forward, you can just add the 1 digit by 1 digit, so you can get the next number. So like 5 plus 0 would be 5, and 1 plus 3 would give you 4. And then you can keep doing that over and over, just adding 15 to the last number that you write to get the next multiple. And that's the quick, easy way of doing it. But if you know 15s, then you can just go ahead and write them. 15 is actually not that hard either. So you got 15, 30, 45, and then 60, and then 75. And this is the one that's kind of tricky. So if you go from 75 to 90, and then the next one, I had some students in class today telling me it was 105. Some people were telling me it was 115. So the way we're going to do is we're going to check it by actually doing the strategy. So we're going to add 1 digit at a time. The 0 from the 90 plus the 5 of the 15. So 0 plus 5 is just 5. And then we're going to add the 1 plus the 9, so that gives me 10. So my answer would be 105, a 10 with a 5 in front. So then we're going to keep going on that one. So 105 plus 15 is 120, plus 15 gives me 135. And if I want to check all my answers, I want to make sure that I did all of my additions or multiplications correctly. I'm going to multiply by 10. I'm going to do one more. And the way that I check that is, again, I do the same process, but now I know that 15 times 10 is just going to be a 15 with a 0 at the end. So that's going to be 150, which is the number 150. And if I do my strategy correctly one last time and I get 150, that means that all of these multiples are correct. If I get anything other than 150, then it's not going to be correct, and I made a mistake somewhere in my addition or my multiplications. So I'm going to add the 5 plus a 5, and that gives me 10. And I'm going to carry the 1 in my finger, like we've talked about in class. And then we're going to add the 1 plus the 3, and 1 plus 3 gives me 4, plus the 1 in my finger, that would give me a 5. And then we still have a 1 in the hundreds place in the 135, so we'll bring it down, and that does give me 150. So I know that all of my multiples are correct. So now step number 3 in my division process, in my notes, in my journal, is to solve. So I'm going to start solving now. So 15 cannot go into 1 because 1 is smaller than 15. So we'll put a 0 on top of the 1. Then we'll move on to the next digit, which is a 0. So that makes it a 10 if you put it together with the 1. 15 is still too big to divide into 10. So that means that we're going to put another 0 on the top of your quotient, and then we'll extend to the next number, which is 108. It would make it 108. And now we do have a number that's big enough for 108, which is going to be 15 times 7, and that gives me 105. So we'll use the 7 in the quotient, we'll subtract 105 from 108, and that gives me a remainder of 3. We'll bring down the next digit, which is a 9, and that gives me 39. So we look at my table of my T-chart of my multiples, and I can see that 2 times 3, or 15 times 2 is 30. So we'll use that one. So we'll put the 2 in the quotient, and we'll subtract 30 from 39, and we'll get a remainder of 9. Now, if you look in your notes again, on step number 4, it tells you that step 4 is that you must add a 0 if you need it at the end of your dividend, like this one. This 0 is the one that you need to add, because in this case we'll have a remainder of 9, and we cannot end up with a remainder whenever we're dividing decimals. So we have to add that 0 and then bring it down. That makes it now a 90. And then that 90, we can keep dividing by looking at this list of multiples again, and you can see that the 6 is the one that's going to help us. So 15 times 6 is going to give us 90, and if you subtract that, then you'll end up with a remainder of 0. So now we're done, and my remainder is 7 and 26 hundredths. The next number we have is 30 divided by 12. Now, remember the steps that we've been doing before. The first number, the 30, is my dividend. So that's the same number that I'm going to put inside my division bracket. And my divisor is my 12. So in this case, I don't have a decimal, so I don't have to bring it up. So all I'll have to do is do my list of multiples of the divisor, which is the 12 in this case. So I'll go ahead and do that. 12 times 1 times 2 times 3 all the way to the 9. And you can see, you can check your work with mine to see if you got all of your multiplications correct. And you can also look at the pattern here. In this case, we do have a pattern. We have a 2, 4, 6, 8, 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and the next one would of course be 0. But if you look at the second column, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it skips the 5, and you go 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So would you skip the 11, or would you go ahead and put the 11? That's kind of weird. So sometimes you'll get patterns on one column and not the other one, and sometimes you'll get patterns on both columns. So you can kind of watch out for those patterns, see if you can find any of those. Those are kind of cool to find every once in a while. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to check to see if all my multiplications are right by multiplying by 10. You know 12 times 10 should give me 120. So if I do that correctly, I'll add 2 plus 8, that gives me 10, carry the 1 in my finger. I'll add the 1 plus the 0, that's 1, plus the 1 in my finger, that gives me 2. And then I have 1 in the hundreds place, so I'll bring that down. So it did give me 120. That tells me that all of my multiplication facts are in fact done correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply, or start dividing, solving. 12 cannot go into 3. So I'll put the 0 up there, so I'll extend to the next number, and now I have 30. So the one that's going to help me here is going to be the 2. 12 times 2 gives me 24. If I subtract, I end up with a remainder of 6. Here is the catchy part. The catchy part right now is going to be that we are going to be adding a 0 so that we can continue dividing. If we continue dividing, this decimal is going to go up into the quotient, and then we're going to go ahead and add a 0 and bring it down. When you do that, you're going to find the next answer in your list of multiples, which is going to be the 5. So 12 times 5 gives you 60, and 12 times 5, if you subtract the 60 from the 60, now you'll end up with a remainder of 0, which gives you the quotient of 2 and 5/10. So we're going to go to the next problem. In this case, the dividend is 73 and 2/10, and we are going to divide by our divisor of 24. So if we do this correctly and we follow the same steps that we've been doing all along, the very first step is to bring up the decimal. The second step is to list all of your multiples of 24. And if you list your multiples of 24, then you'll end up with this multiplication table, and then you can check all of your work. So make sure that you're doing yours before you check mine, to make sure that you are doing this correctly, and you can have this strategy down for the time that you do your test. And then you can do this all by yourself. So I'm going to go ahead and fast forward here on the video on my steps so you can follow along and check all of your problems. I'm going to go ahead and show you the very last problem that I want to talk to you about, because that one is a weird one. So if you need to go back and review any of these things, go ahead and push pause and then check all your steps, see if you got the same thing that I did, okay? So at this time, here's the next two problems. And again, I'm just going to fast forward because it's the same steps over and over. So you can go ahead and pause it, rewind it, keep watching it, whatever you need to do so that you can check all of your work. All of this work should be done before you watch my video. Unless you don't understand something, then at that point you can come back and see all of my instruction again. So here's the same steps that I follow again. And then here's my answer for that problem, which is 8 and 25/100. The next step that we have, the next problem that we have is 14 and 30/100 divided by 26. So we'll bring up the decimal again. And again, I'll do my list of multiples of 26 for you. Check your work against mine. And if we do that correctly, you'll end up with all of these multiples there. And I'm just doing the same steps over and over so you can see if you're doing it right. So you can go ahead and check all of your work, and your quotient ends up being 55/100. Now here's the last two. On this one, I'm not even going to talk through. I'm just going to show you all of the answers. So make sure that you push pause right here, do these two problems to see if you can challenge yourself, and then come back and look at my problems. Okay, so hopefully you push pause already and you did them all, and now you're coming back to watch it. So here's the answers. For the very first one, when you divide them by 16, your answer ends up being 5 and 2/100. The second one, where you divide them by, you were dividing by 16 on the first one. Now you divide them by 15, and your answer should be 6 and 38/100 if you do all of your work correctly. So you can pause it here and check all of your work if you need to. This is the last problem, and this is the one I want to talk to you about briefly so you can make sure that you have all of your steps right. So I'm going to go ahead and show you all of the steps all the way up to we run out of numbers, which is the 2. Notice that we have a remainder of 10. So we'll have to add a 0 and keep going like we've done in the past, right? But notice what happens now. You have a remainder of 4. If you add another 0 and keep going, you have a 40. So you'll keep dividing, you'll use the 3 on the top, and you get 36. Well, guess what happens? You get a remainder of 4 again. If you add a 0 and keep and bring it down, you have a 40 again. So you'll have to use another 3 and bring it the 36, subtract that from 40. Guess what happens? You get 4 again, which if you add another 0, you end up with 40, which means you're going to end up with 3 again in the quotient, which means you're going to end up with a whole bunch of 3s over and over and over until you run out of, paper or pencil. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to forget about all the 3s that are extra, and we just leave 1 3 on the answer, and we'll use a little line on top of the 3. That little line is called the bar notation. It's like a bar. And that tells you that this number is the one that keeps repeating on forever. So my final answer is going to be 20 and 183 thousandths with the 3 repeating. Or you can also round. If you get a number that keeps going on like that, you can round to the hundredths place. So in this case, the final answer would be 20 and 18/100. I hope this video helped you, and I hope you now are a master at dividing decimals by whole numbers using the algorithm. If you have any questions, please see me at school the next day. Thank you for watching.